Africa's first ever climate summit kicked off in the...
We examine the outcomes of the first ever truly African climate gathering on the continent.
Africa's first climate summit has wrapped.
Africa's holding its first climate summit.
So this summit is going to be massive.
Africa is landing some major investment deals at its summit in Nairobi in Kenya.
This is a moment that we believe that Africa will assemble and contribute our ideas on what we think the solution to climate change should be.
In Nairobi, Kenya, leaders, activists, and organizations gathered for a historic event, the Africa Climate Summit 2023.
An injustice burns at the heart of the climate crisis, and its flame is scorching hopes and possibilities here in Africa. This continent accounts for less than 4% of global emissions, yet it suffers some of the worst effects of rising global temperatures.
This summit is not just a conference, it's a call to action. It's a moment for Africa to unite, to lead, and to shape a sustainable future for the continent and the world.
You have not just stepped into a conference hall. You have entered the future. A future ripe with potential, driven by global partnerships committed to African prosperity, inclusive growth, and a livable planet for all of us.
As we begin discussions at the Africa Climate Summit, we look forward to your support towards an ambitious agenda to change the perception on the place of Africa in the global efforts to combat the climate change crisis.
The organization of this climate summit in such friendly conditions in just 6 months, thanks to the decision of the African Union Summit last February, is striking proof of the excellence of your leadership, dear friend William. I sincerely congratulate you.
Your participation is a clear demonstration of our unwavering commitment to collectively shape the future of climate change, climate action in Africa and across the world.
Africa is clearly and unfairly in the eye of the storm for what they have not caused. Total emission level is just 3% or below compared with all these global conditions. And therefore, it is a moral and political responsibility for member states, particularly developed world, to provide the necessary fundings and technology and scientific support.
Climate change, we consider it an absolute priority. It is an environmental crisis. It is an environmental priority. So how could we not be present and supporting our Kenyan friends in their leadership, supporting our African Union friends in their leadership to command the attention of the world on climate change. So that's why we're here, and we are delighted.
How do we work with governments, public-private partnerships? How do we finance climate action? These are all things which we are thinking about, and when we come to forums like this, we hear some best practices that are being done out there, and then we can make contacts.
We've been championing as a family of nations this issue. So as you can imagine, I'm thrilled that Kenya and the President Ruto has made the first climate summit in Africa so that Africa's voice can be heard.
In Africa, looking at the issue of climate change, the estimate is we need about $120 billion annually. And if we don't do that, the challenge is we'll continue to face the impact of climate change.
Africa is a solutions powerhouse for saving the climate. And that we need to transform all these natural resources into an asset class that investors are actually willing to invest in.
Something is happening. This is different. I feel that. This is different. At this moment, I believe it is clear that Africa presents some of the greatest opportunity in the world to win this battle about how we heat our homes, drive our vehicles, light our factories and our homes. This is about fundamental production of energy. And if we will make the right choices about that, the future is different for everybody.
Africa continues to carry the burden of rising temperatures, despite contributing the smallest share of global greenhouse gas emissions. This is unfair, but in the long run, playing the blame game is not the answer. A more pragmatic approach is for Africa to be a key player in the search for global climate solutions.
We can no longer afford to address economic development, climate change, and African poverty burden in isolation. The interplay between development and climate change is undeniable, and this interlink demand integrated and coherent solution that would provide opportunity for socio-economic development of Africa.
The summit seeks to address climate change, climate finance, and a green growth path for the continent. It is based on a vision that we're in this together. We must work together to collectively use our strengths to address the climate crisis.
At the days leading to the summit, preparations were heralded by an e-mobility campaign in Nairobi. The rally aimed to raise awareness about electric mobility and promote its adoption for a more sustainable future.
For a long time, the Global South has not had its voice properly on the table. And so the Global South has always been following conversations led by the Global North and the Western countries. And what we've said as Africa, especially led by our President, William Ruto, who is the climate champion for the continent, is that we must have our voices on the table, we must design our solutions, and we must get it right as Africa.
The e-mobility equation for Africa is not a single one because it's multifaceted. It depends on a combination of policy actions, industry activity, and even the user awareness.
For us, the idea was, as a guest, you want to feel fully immersed in nature, you want to be part of nature, you want to be able to glide in the grasslands in an electric, silent, noiseless, non-polluting vehicle. And that's really what we wanted to push as an experience to our guests.
We want to see practical interventions that have a direct impact on our young people. And if we don't get the young people on board now, the biggest polluters of the last 10 years are not going to be the biggest polluters in the next 10 years. And so we have a unique advantage as the African continent, being the youngest continent, the youngest part of this world, to get a new generation already attuned to this kind of thinking.
I think Africa's position remains very solid, that climate finance must come and must reach people. The $100 billion that was committed needs to be delivered by all parties, including African governments, that we need to work together to make this happen.
We really suffer the brunt and the effects and impacts of climate change, and with the help of great green climate funds or funds from the developed countries or other interventions that can be done, then Africa will be able to deal with its impacts, deal with the climate change effects, and then be able to put their infrastructure in a climate smart way.
Well, the summit has been great to see. It's excellent to see a climate action summit in Africa as we move into the next COP. So I'm hoping this conference will turn that around. We've seen some nice commitments, but we need to turn those PowerPoints into power plans.
Solutions are out there. So the question is very simple, from our side to policymakers. Try to get climate funding to the most vulnerable and you will see a different world.
See how you work together to transform institutions, to transform systems, to have a collective action which will make our effort together change the architecture.
I am confident that we are all inspired by the possibilities before us and galvanized by the demands of this critical time to engage productively, collaborate successfully, and conclude the Africa Summit with a Nairobi Declaration on green growth and climate finance agenda that will commit us to pursue a climate-positive path to propel Africa's economy and promote job creation in a manner that limits our emissions and aids global decarbonization efforts.
The Africa Climate Summit 2023 is not just a gathering, it's a turning point. Africa is rising to meet the climate challenge with determination, innovation, and unity. Together, Africa is forging a path toward a sustainable and resilient future, leaving a legacy of hope for generations to come.